Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the value framework for immersive learning. My name is Charlie Schreier. I am the content marketing lead at Strivr, and I'm excited to be joined by our CEO, Derek Belch, who is also the co-founder of Strivr. And we're going to bring him in just a second, but just a few of the housekeeping things as we typically do on these webinars. First, we're going to talk about the value framework. Derek's going to walk you through a little bit about Strivr and immersive learning and just give you a little bit of that background, and then talk about the value framework. And then from there, we're going to go into more of an extended Q&A session, and ask me anything if you want to call it that. And so I'll be moderating that. So as you have questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the chat, whether they're related to the value framework or not. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have around immersive learning, around the market in general, trends going forward. These are all things that Derek loves to talk about. So with that, I invite you to ask questions, and I invite Derek to jump into the presentation. So Derek, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you go from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie, and good morning, everybody, at least those West Coasters, and happy lunchtime to anyone on the East Coast. So as Charlie said, just want to reinforce the plan for today. We'll talk a little bit about learning and virtual reality, immersive learning specifically. We'll talk about the value framework, define it a little bit, give you guys some thought starters, do a few case studies from some of our most prominent and most successful customers. And then, as Charlie said, the bulk of today is about you. It's an Ask Me Anything. Those have been very popular segments for us. We already got some questions submitted as part of the registration, and they will be surprises to me. I haven't even seen them, so we'll do more as we go. So we love that part of what we do. Before we jump in, let's just keep it light. It's the week before Thanksgiving. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's a weird time in the world. I am in my home office / guest room. I'm wearing sweatpants. Charlie has a gnarly mustache for Movember. He's wearing sweatpants. So life is good. Let's smile throughout this whole thing. Let's keep it light. This is a very fun topic to be discussing. So off we go. All right, first and foremost, for those of you who are not familiar with us, and why do we have credibility to talk about this subject, we actually got our start in sports. So, my personal background, I grew up in San Diego, played football at Stanford as an undergrad, and then went and worked in consulting for a couple of years, went to business school, and then had this thought in my head: if I don't see coaching before I turn 30, I am going to regret it forever. So I went back to Stanford as a graduate assistant. I actually coached for the team while getting another master's. I did not need another master's, but that was a requirement. I coached for the team for 2 years, and I had to do a thesis since I was also a grad student. My thesis was to come up with a way to train football players using virtual reality. Well, that project was so successful that when I sat down with the head coach of Stanford, David Shaw, for my 2-year review in December of 2014, he gave me a glowing review as a coach and said, you could probably be sitting in my chair in the next 10 years if you wanted to. But if I were you, I would go do that thing that you did for your project, and I'd go start a company. And I'd love to give you some money to get off the ground if you'd be open to it. So I think I'm one of the only people to get fired with a non-$30,000 severance check that was instead an investment check into what ultimately became Strivr. And for the first 2 years, we were mainly working with NFL and college football teams using virtual reality to give players mental reps when their body is off the field, but their brain thinks they're on the field, based on the way virtual reality works, which we'll talk about here in a minute, just to remind everybody on the science. So that was our genesis. For the first 2 years, we got in the news, we made a splash, we built credibility by working with professional quarterbacks, and it was an awesome ride. And then in the summer of 2016, 18, 20 months in, we got a pretty fortuitous phone call, as I like to call it, from Walmart. And they said, hey, we've seen what you guys are doing in sports. We would love for you to come down and talk to us about what we could do for employee training. That was in late 2016. And here we are 4 years later. And at this point, we have trained over 1 million enterprise employees across a couple dozen Fortune 1000 companies spanning a wide range of different industries, from retail to grocery, to banking, to logistics, and to airlines, the whole thing. So super exciting. We are certainly not the only people on planet Earth that have experience and knowledge with immersive learning and virtual reality, but as it relates to credibility, objectively, not arrogantly, we've just done this more than anybody else. In some cases, 100 to 1,000 times more as it relates to number of people trained. So we do feel that gives us some credibility to hopefully educate you and answer your questions, appropriately, and really help build your knowledge of what we're doing here. So that said, let's dive in. First off, let's make sure that we are all on the same page about the science behind why virtual reality works. Why does immersive learning work more effectively in comparison to two dimensions, in comparison to looking at something on a screen or listening to a lecture, right? So this is really all about science. As you can see here on the bullets, we've kind of just called out a few specific things. VR drives behavior change by strengthening the brain's connections to translate learning to real life on the job. VR is a more engaging modality for learners. VR enables repetition anywhere, anytime. VR allows learners to practice in a safe environment. This is one of our favorites. Sometimes it's literally safe in that you're not going up on a wind turbine, for example, to do your training, where you could fall and die while you do your training. Sometimes it's metaphorically safe as it relates to concepts like soft skills, where I can make mistakes when I'm going through my simulation with an avatar versus with a real human being, right? So we love the word safe, practicing in a safe environment. And then lastly, we'll talk about this a little later. I'm sure some people have some questions. Just an absolute treasure trove of data as it relates to what can come out of putting a VR headset on a learner's face and seeing what happens. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little more later. The metaphor that we use often, that I'm sure I will say at least half a dozen times today, is the flight simulator. All the science is awesome, but if there's one thing we want you to remember, if there's a heuristic we want you to grab onto, it is VR is a flight simulator-like experience for blank. Insert job here, from cashier all the way up to CEO, right? If you think about where VR might make sense in your organization, constantly remind yourself, okay, where do I want to create a flight simulator-like experience for my employees? VR is not for everything, just like flight simulators aren't necessarily for everything. But if you want to give your employees the experience of, quote, going into the cockpit and learning how to fly the plane without the risk of failing and crashing a multi-million-dollar asset, killing 200 people, et cetera, then that is how we want you thinking. So there's a lot of cool ideas out there that VR isn't necessarily that fit for, but as it relates to putting people in that flight simulator-like experience, that is the lens through which we really push our customers to think when they're thinking about the right fit for virtual reality and immersive learning. All right, so that's just a little background to reinforce some principles that we always make sure we touch on in every webinar that we do. Today is about value. Today is about how do I bring value to the organization through virtual reality? How do I measure value? How do I think about value? Maybe not surprising for some of you, there isn't one way to think about value. And why is this in a circle? Because no one potential source of value is any better than the other from a hierarchical perspective, nor are any of these the foundation to the others. So, there's really three ways that we try to coach our customers to think about this. We'll start on the upper right, value to the employee from an engagement and knowledge retention standpoint. We'll go counterclockwise to the left. Operationally, are we more efficient as a result of better real world performance? Are we lowering our costs as a result of having our onboarding time, for example, which we'll get to in a second? All of those operational efficiencies that we can drive from a value perspective. And then, continuing down to the lower right, culture. Whether you're actually training on kind of a softer, fuzzier thing and using VR to reinforce culture, core values, et cetera, or whether we're bringing a new tool into the organization to reinvest culturally in what we do from a people development perspective, that is certainly highly relevant in today's world, where a lot of us don't know when we're going back to work, and we're doing what Charlie and I are doing today, where we're taking a Zoom call in our sweatpants with a collar on, right? So, bringing new tools, digital transformation into the organization, that's another way to think about value in culture. Okay, so one of the things we like to do with our customers is give them a framework for how to think. And this slide in particular is all over our website. These slides will be accessible later, so take notes if you want, but just know that these are all in the ebooks and the guides that we publish on how to do immersive learning, VR, the right way. But here's just a little bit of a roadmap as we're talking about all of this today. So number one, establish business objectives and key metrics up front. I can't tell you how many times we meet with potential customers and someone raises their hand and they say, how are we going to measure effectiveness? And we respectfully ask them, well, how do you measure effectiveness of your current learning solutions? And like everybody looks at each other and they can't really answer that question. So establishing up front what the business objective is we're trying to accomplish. What are the key metrics? What is going to define success? If you're piloting something for $100,000, what story are you going to tell to your VP, your SVP, your CFO as it relates to why you should make a multi-million-dollar investment in doing this at scale? It really does start up front. Okay, from there, what traits are we looking for? What skills are we looking to build? What are we looking to identify about our employees? What is the curriculum that we are trying to write here? Are we actually just turning existing curriculum into a immersive version of that from a modality perspective, or are we actually building out a curriculum for the first time that we've never done before? We've actually seen both. We've had some customers come to us and they've said, hey, we don't have training for blank right now. We don't want to do it in 2D. We want to leapfrog 2D and start in virtual reality. The converse of that is, hey, we've got this awesome, robust program and we want VR just to be a piece of that. So we're going to give you all of our 2D training and tell us how we should, VRize this and have it be a complement, a supplement, maybe one day a replacement. So super, super important. Bullet 4, actually build the experience. I think this is a really important bullet. It seems very simple, but a lot of us have seen really bad PowerPoint presentations before. We've made them ourselves. So actually building the presentation, building the module to capture the data you're looking for, super important. Crap in, crap out, right? We don't want to build subpar content from a learning perspective, especially as it relates to data on the back end. From there, reviewing proficiency and behavior. So is this actually doing what we want it to do? Is this what we were looking for? Back to bullet number 1 when we talked about business objectives, success criteria, et cetera. And then lastly, hopefully we're able to correlate what's happening in VR to some sort of real world outcome. That may be as it relates to bubbling up knowledge that people have, that maybe relate to real world performance. But bottom line, in a perfect world, we are matching something going on in the headset to the real world. And that's super important. So let's talk about a few case studies. And these are all from large corporations. Perhaps you're not a company of this size, but that's okay. Everybody can learn from each other. So we're going to start with Walmart. I think at this point, anyone who's interested in immersive learning knows that Walmart is like the gold standard here. They went enterprise wide with 4 headsets per store times 4,500 stores, over 16,000 devices 2 years ago, and really put virtual reality in the enterprise on the map. One of the business challenges that Walmart was looking to solve for was, as part of their rollout across the enterprise, was what we call accelerating speed to proficiency. And this was in training employees how to use the pickup tower that was being installed in all of their stores over the course of a year. And the old way to train employees on new technology that comes into the store, change management associated with that, et cetera, was to have a trainer go from store to store to store to store to store and spend literally an entire day training the associates on how to use this technology. And we found through a small little test with Walmart that 20 minutes in the headset was just as effective as an 8-hour day. The slide says 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes in the headset. And they were like, what are we doing? Why continue to take the whole day? Let's take that trainer and let's save money on his or her travel costs. Let's put them to a more important, higher importance, higher urgency thing where a human is really important. Let's let virtual reality do the job of something that we used to pay X dollars per hour times 8 hours times 500,000 people that needed to learn how to use this piece of equipment. So Walmart not only sped up their improved their speed to proficiency, but also from a cost savings perspective, quite a bit of money back as it relates to getting floor time for associates. So super, super important and one of the best case studies we have. Now let's talk about something a little fuzzier. Sprouts. One of the ways that Sprouts competes is through their core values and through their associates being a cut above their competition. At least this is their goal as it relates to customer service and friendliness and all of the wonderful things that Sprouts instills from a core values standpoint. So we did another test with Sprouts, and we compared a couple hundred learners that went through their traditional training, their traditional onboarding as it relates to their core values, their brand, customer service, et cetera. And then we took a couple hundred learners with virtual reality and who went through the training in VR and using immersive learning. And we found that associates that went through immersive learning as it relates to core values, brand, culture, customer service, et cetera, were 16 times more likely to recall the concepts that Sprouts was looking for from a core values perspective, from a customer service perspective. Just a mind-blowingly high number. And by the way, this is kind of a blend of old school and new school. Some of you may be thinking, okay, well, I do my quizzes and I can assess whether my people know what they're supposed to know coming out of onboarding. So is Sprouts. And those quizzes were yielding X percentage of answers that were correct and accurate, and immersive learning was yielding Y percentage, and it was 16 times higher. So you can just do the math on where those numbers were before and where those numbers were now. It can only be so great, right? Because 16 times is a lot. So another awesome case study as it relates to the value that Sprouts was getting, has gotten out of immersive learning as part of their onboarding and part of their cultural reinforcement. And the last case study is one that we get a ton of questions about, and it has to do with safety. In this case, Verizon approached us and said, hey, we have this unique challenge. Our stores do get robbed from time to time at scale over the course of our couple thousand stores in the country. It adds up to quite a few over the course of the year, several dozen. We can't simulate a store robbery, especially not at scale. It's borderline impossible. Yeah, we could bring every employee through a fake store and hire actors, but how many times are we going to do that over the course of the year? So how do we create a at-scale solution for a situation that's, number one, very dangerous, number two, unfortunately happens often, number three, the most important thing to do in a situation like this is to remain calm and comply with the robber and then do certain things that you've been trained to do by the safety professional of the organization. So putting team members through a virtual store robbery, again, the flight simulator like experience for what happens if my store gets robbed, what will I think, what will I feel, what will I do, led to a 97% outcome as it relates to team members and how prepared they felt if they were to experience this in real life. Now, how do you quantify that from a dollars and cents standpoint? Honestly, I don't know. And neither do some of our customers. How do you quantify a life? I don't know. That's pretty tough. But as it relates to existing learning modalities and numbers that Verizon was seeing on preparedness, this just blew everything out of the water. Fortunately for Verizon and the technology, unfortunately for the people that went through this, we have actually, there have been a couple dozen of these since this training went into effect over 2 years ago. And we have gotten phone calls from these associates, and they've said that thing worked. I felt like I had been there before. I did the right thing. I felt more calm, right? So again, a lot of you can probably be thinking about your own ways to measure ROI here and how your organization would view it. But hopefully this is helpful to give 3 very specific examples of 3 different types of value that our customers have obtained out of immersive learning. And the last thing I want to add, going back to the slide where we talked about the framework and kind of the steps, each one of these customers went in to this engagement, this particular piece of content, knowing what they wanted to get out of it. It wasn't, let's just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. They had a plan. They had a business objective they were looking to achieve. Cannot underestimate that or understate that enough. Excuse me. All right. And in closing, there's a lot going on this slide. We will make it available in our ebook and on our website as it relates to this topic. But just want to kind of put all this together, right? So we've got the cost savings bucket. We've got the operational efficiency bucket. We've got the employee engagement bucket. We'll probably develop another one of these that is cultural reinforcement. We'll add that in as well. But here are, all of the ways to think about how to approach driving value and obtaining value in these buckets, right? So we're decreasing turnover. We're improving workplace safety. We're improving brand and scale culture. Now I'm moving to the right. We're improving customer service. We're accelerating speed to proficiency. We're hiring and promoting more effectively, right? These things all speak to operational efficiency. And then lastly, reducing onboarding time up at the top, decreasing the number of incidences in the workplace, eliminating business interruptions, right? These are all cost savings type things. So we will make this slide available for all of you that have registered today and beyond. And hopefully this is something that you can, print out and put next to your computer on your home office, or when you get back to the office, put it right there, because this is a tremendously valuable way to think about value creation as it relates to immersive learning. All right, I'm done, at least with the unmaestroed portion of the proceedings. We're going to shift into the Ask Me Anything. Before we do, this is a quick call to action for our website, strivr.com/resources. We actually have an ebook on this topic, this very topic of measuring the impact of immersive learning. We also have a phenomenal manifesto called The Ultimate Guide, how to think about and actually go do immersive learning in your organization. We've got a number of awesome resources that Charlie and the marketing team have put together. We get a lot of really good feedback on these. Candidly, we're just giving the playbook out to everybody for free. Even our competitors, go ahead, do it. We'll out execute you. It's all good. So please go to our website and check all this out. And with that, let's shift into the Ask Me Anything. And Charlie is going to be the driver here. So.
Great, thanks, Derek, and thanks for the kind words on the guide and the impact paper. Yeah, definitely recommend giving those a look. We'll have a variety of other case studies. Derek went into a couple of them, but there's plenty more. So because you just talked about the value framework, Derek, let's get it started with an ROI question.
Sure.
We got a great question here from Jim. How do you quantify the ROI for a customer as it relates to replacing their traditional training modalities like classrooms, videos, et cetera, with a VR solution?
Sure. So it's a great question, Jim. It's probably the one we hear, 80% of the time. Again, as hopefully you learned from today, that there isn't just one way to quantify it. I would say the most commonly used value driver in this area is speed to proficiency. We've had a lot of customers that have laid out all of the things they do traditionally. You referenced them, lectures, e-learning, et cetera, in your question. And okay, guys, how many hours does this add up to? Okay, it's 40 hours, it's 20 hours, it's 2 weeks, whatever it is. And then, okay, cool. What's your goal? Well, we'd love to get the onboarding time cut in half. Awesome. Let's go through and let's figure out, what is really core, what might be superfluous. And now let's say, okay, what do you want to address with virtual reality? And the research shows that, again, time to proficiency, people learn in VR the same or more in a fraction of the time. So as an example, we had a customer a couple of years ago, the way they started, insurance company. water mitigation training for claims adjusters. And we did a test. We looked at the retention coming out of a 3-hour lecture from the world's leading expert in water mitigation that they had, every week do these sessions for their claims adjusters. And we put employees in a headset for 20 minutes, claims adjusters, and we compared the learning from each of those on these core concepts. And it was borderline identical. So that customer was like, okay, why am I doing the 3-hour lecture? What is my ROI going to be on dropping that lecture and getting 2 hours and 40 minutes back? Maybe one day when everybody owns a headset, just like we own tablets, cell phones, computers, et cetera, maybe your claims adjusters all have headsets at home and they don't even need to come in person for the training. And that was kind of fortune telling relative to where we are today, right? So I would say that's the big one. Like, look at your current training and look at, okay, now where can VR shave minutes, hours, days, a week? Because the time to proficiency, the learning is neutral to positive in a fraction of the time.
Great. So staying on that same topic around ROI, how long does it typically take to see ROI, especially on operational efficiency improvements?
Okay, this is a big one. We often have to have level sets. Conversations with customers, come to Jesus conversations, if you will, right? Let's have a no BS conversation. So there are many times where we have seen an ROI, how can I say this? An ROI inducing data point, okay, in a pilot in like a week, a month, 2 months. So I just shared an example. Okay, we've put a couple hundred claims adjusters through each training, and we're seeing in like 1 month's time that the knowledge retention is almost identical in a fraction of the time. Okay, cool. That's with a couple hundred people. Now imagine what it would be at scale. Okay, well, we have 10,000 claims adjusters. Okay, I can't tell you what the ROI is on those 10,000 people because we haven't done it yet with 10,000 people. So that's where I talk about that, that come to Jesus conversation. Hey guys, like, don't hold us accountable to ROI across your entire organization when it may take months to years to actually implement. We all know how long it takes to do things in large companies. So I can't tell you what the 2-year ROI is today because we haven't done it yet. But what I can tell you, what we can confidently tell you from all of our case studies and what we saw in this brief subset in a pilot is this is what we saw with X number of people. Now imagine what it would be with Y across the organization. So that is where it's really important that we're just realistic on all this stuff. And learning transformation, digital transformation, these things take time. So we're not a magic bullet, and also we're not going to see the organization-wide the tens of millions of dollars in a month. But when do we ever, with any, even bringing in Zoom and video calls, how long does it take for everyone to actually do their calls to where we see that ROI over the course of a year, 2 years, et cetera? We often have to have that conversation. Let's not hold us to the 2-year standard today, but let's get the data that we're hoping to see with this much of a piece of the pie, and then let's go to the entire pie, and we'll see that ROI over time.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's part of the partnership, right? That Strivr is dedicated to with all of our customers is really leaning into that and working alongside customers.
And just let's just to add to that. There's going to be a leap of faith required here, right? There is with any technology. Anyone can test something with this many people or this part of the organization, but there will be a leap of faith with anything you do to do it at scale. And so with immersive learning, with VR, hopefully we're showing how successful that little sliver can be, and then we go, to the rest of the organization. And I can almost guarantee you'll get it at scale thereafter.
Definitely. And so I think this question plays nicely into how you were talking about scale and how we approach all of our customer relationships, and it comes from Max. And it's around what direction do you see regarding the future of platforms and any standardization of VR platforms within immersive learning?
Yeah, that's a good question. All right, so I will try to answer this question objectively and a shameless plug for Strivr at the same time, but it's part of the objective answer, to be honest. Okay, so today, right now, November 18th, 19th, 2020, there are a lot of things that have to happen to make a VR execution successful. And many of you have probably seen this on our website. Download our ultimate guide if you're wondering what all these things are, right? We need creation of content. We need procurement and shipping of headsets. We need data and analytics. We need customer and tech support when something goes wrong with a device. We need to ship them all out to everybody. We need to manage, and we need to manage our way to success, roll out and adoption. We need to integrate it into our learning management system. The list goes on and on and on, right? And then obviously there's a lot of details within each of those. There is no, let me rephrase it. There is not a company on planet Earth today, other than Strivr, that can do all of that for you successfully. There are a ton of companies that do one or two or three of that long list of things. We are happy to provide you with a list of vendors if you would like, but there isn't anyone that does it all. And we do. From a product and a platform perspective, the software that's powering all of this at scale, and also a services perspective, creation of content, account management, change management, technical support, all that stuff. We do. That is objective. To prove that I'm not just going to BS everybody and Strivr, I will be transparent that our software platform, as amazing as it is and as leaps and bounds further as it is than everybody else's, it's not done. It's improving every day. There's still a long way to go. We need to make it better. Even the best software in the world, Microsoft, right? Microsoft Word, it gets better every day, some little thing or some big thing. So we still have a lot of work to do to make our platform even better. But as it relates to the question, what platform is out there today and into the future, there isn't one other than what we do, other than Strivr. Now, that's going to change 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 24 months. New things will continue to come out. As of today, I think we're probably a year away from seeing any other major player. But as of today, we can do it all from both a platform and a services perspective. We would love to educate you on what it takes to succeed. And if you want to work with us, awesome. If you don't, like I said, we will happily make recommendations for others that are out there.
Great. Yeah. We've gotten a couple questions kind of around the differentiators of Strivr and how we see ourselves ahead of the competition as well. And I think you answered that too. Did you want to add anything maybe to that particular piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, good. I'm glad this is resonating and people are asking. So I think, again, just to reinforce what I just said, right? The platform to pull this off, all of this off, content creation, device provisioning and fulfillment and shipping and logistics, content management, device management via the cloud, the actual playback of the content, the UI, the UX, the experience when you put it on your face. You're not fumbling around with controllers. You're up and running in 30 seconds. The data portal to actually go in and see all this. The integration into the learning management systems. On. Okay, so that is us. The most important thing that I would be remiss if I didn't add, since you asked, Charlie, doing it at scale. So we have over 20,000 devices out in the field. We just got the thumbs up on a couple other customers to go even bigger. We're going to have 30,000 devices within the next 3 or 4 months out in the field. Obviously, we have Walmart. That level of scale speaks for itself. So doing this at scale is so critically important for a large organization. That is our biggest differentiator. Not only do we have all these things, but we also have actually done it at scale. So you do not need to go in nervous that it's not going to work when you work with us. If you're working with someone else, candidly, you should be nervous. You're going to have to piece together so many things. It will be very frustrating, and it will probably fail, at least initially. And then we'll get called to do a cleanup job. That happens a lot. So that's just where we are right now in the industry. As the industry matures, again, and more folks are out there that can do this, we're happy to provide recommendations and tell you the pros and cons of each company. But that's kind of where we are today.
Great, great. Okay, cool. So we've gotten some really good questions come in. We've also gotten a comment from Jim around the golf clubs in my background, who says we were rubbing it in because it's -11 in Alberta, Canada today. So sorry about that, Jim.
I'm playing tomorrow afternoon. I'm going too, out here in California. So sorry, Jim.
Yeah, sorry, Jim. But we'll look forward to maybe playing with you at some point in the summertime. Okay, so let's move into, I want to talk a little bit about some use cases, specifically safety. We've gotten some good questions, one of them specifically around utilities, but then also another question that maybe I'll read this, and Derek, maybe if you could work in a couple of different industry examples as we have them around some of the more risky task-based case studies that we've been engaged with beyond the Verizon use case. Like what's appropriate, what's not, and maybe some examples that you could share around safety training.
Sure. Okay, so I think there's kind of two directions that this can go, and one is with safety specifically. One is like basic safety training, slips, trips, and falls, hazard identification, et cetera, from whether it's a Walmart store or a, BMW manufacturing plant, right? Hey, there are a lot of like basic safety things that our people just fail to identify. These lead to injuries and insurance claims and blah, 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 blah. And hopefully we can improve those things with better real world performance via identifying basic safety hazards in a workplace environment. Okay, so that's kind of path one. That's pretty straightforward. And I would even, actually, let me change that. There's three paths. That's kind of path number one. That's pretty straightforward. Path number two is what we just talked about with Verizon. Emotional preparedness, impossible to train on situations like store robberies, active shooters, et cetera, things that happen, once in a lifetime, if ever, but they're really, really high impact and high importance. And we got to train emotionally for them, operationally for them. And there's just no way to do it in the real world. All right. The third bucket is kind of what this question is getting to. So there's this whole other world out there of, working with dangerous equipment, getting repetitions on the random oil derrick in the middle of the Arctic Ocean that we can't get to otherwise, hitting the right buttons on a machine so we don't have a meltdown of the nuclear power plant. I mean, the list goes on and on. So those are, from a flight simulator perspective, those are amazing fits for virtual reality. I mean, there is no better way to train someone on what to do and not to do with those pieces of equipment in those situations, in these remote random areas of the world, et cetera, than VR. There's just no better way to do it. I mean, that is the flight simulator analogy to a T. What's the alternative? Watching a video, looking at a PowerPoint, closing your eyes, like, just doesn't do the job. So as far as that third bucket of how to think about the technology, home run use case and application. Now, this webinar is about value and ROI. The question that you have to ask yourself as a steward of the organization is, what am I doing this for? How am I selling this in up top? How many people are going to use this? What value will this provide on the back end? And I can't tell you how many times we have heard from customers on this third bucket, and we've said, this is awesome. Okay, you want to do the oil derrick training in Arctic Ocean. And they say, what does it cost? Well, I don't know, like, this is a pretty high tech thing. This may be several $100,000 to a couple $1 million to build out this really intricate simulation from a content perspective. And then okay, cool. How many people are going to use it, Mr. or Mrs. Customer? Well, there's about 15 people. Okay, so great. So let's just make this number up. Let's say this costs $1 million for this. Let's say 500,000, more realistic, for this amazing VR simulation that 15 people over the course of the year are going to go through. That's fine if the ROI to the organization associated with those 15 people is more than $500,000. Again, whether it's the flights, whether it's the operational improvements, whether it's someone's life if they do something wrong, whether it's the whole city's power grid, whatever it is, cool. But so often we hear these amazing fits for VR that don't have a learner population attached to them on the back end that justifies the investment, particularly not for an at-scale annual subscription, continuous usage, keep the lights on solution. Like a one-time thing, they're going to do it once and they're never going to do it again. Okay, maybe, but we got to maintain these things. We want to constantly improve them. You need data. There's ongoing costs associated with new hardware, et cetera. So you got to be able to justify the investment you're going to make. And whether it's $50,000, $500,000, or $5 million to build some of these really awesome simulations, the learner population has to match. And then the last thing that I'll say on that, and just pushing all of you to think about this, also think about throughput. Also think about where you're going to put these simulations. So often we see these things, we're going to put it in the innovation center in the basement in Stockholm. And I'm not making this up with some of these. And it's like, okay, how many people are going to use that? Well, 100 people work in that building and in that city, and 10 of them. Okay, how are we going to get to the rest of the 10,000 that you want to go through this, right? So again, pushing the customer to think about, okay, we've identified a use case, but now let's start to go in and chip away at value. And all these things matter. We've seen so many pilots go to die because these things were not thought of up front.
Definitely. And just to bring back the concept of Strivr's partnership is that we're kind of there not just to challenge our customers to think about that, but also to bring them along, right? And to help them figure out the answers. And I think that's one of the things that we do really well.
Yeah, our motto here, our engagement model is we will do it for you, we will do it with you, and then eventually you will do it yourself. We have this, in many of our materials online. We want you to get to the point where this is like a phone, a tablet, a computer, and a lot of this is DIY. At a minimum for just maintaining it every day, at best actually creating your own content, editing your own content, your portal, et cetera. So to Charlie's point, yeah, we bring our customers along as we go, because ultimately we don't want to have to white glove you, for the next 10 years. We want you to do this yourself. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about learner population in that last answer, and we've gotten a handful of questions, which I think are questions we get pretty often, which is just around adoption. One question is around particularly in traditional industries, how well do people respond to VR? What about dizziness? That's obviously a question we get pretty often. Non-tech people, non-gamers, older populations, and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. It's still early in the game. VR is not yet to the point where, here's your cell phone. Oh, off I go, right? There's still a little bit of a learning curve for some people. There's some trepidation for folks as well. I've never seen this before. Okay, am I going to get sick, et cetera? We tell people that if you can be a passenger in a car, you'll be just fine as it relates to nausea, dizziness, et cetera. And 98 times out of 100, that's exactly what happens. We have a lot of folks that maybe saw a demo before, maybe they saw a virtual roller coaster at a shopping center, and they're like, I got sick, I'm going to get sick in this one. We're like, no. The way we make the content, we keep it very steady. We're very mindful of this. My co-founder is Jeremy Bailenson, Stanford professor who studies this stuff in his lab every day. So we're constantly obsessing over user experience and not wanting to have a negative user experience. So by and large, nausea, dizziness, et cetera, not issues for 98+% of a learner population. After that, it's kind of your call as to how you want to use the technology, who you want to use it for with, who you don't want to use it. I would say by and large, yeah, the younger generations are usually like, let's go. I don't care. Give it to me. The older generations may be a little more skeptical. But I would say if I had to leave everybody with one thought on this question, it's just fun. It's different. It's more engaging. It's better. We had one of our customers in the logistics space. This was at the end of last year. This is one of my favorite Strivr moments. 62 years old. And goes through his training in VR, takes off the headset and says, I can't wait to tell my grandson what I did at work today. So there you go. When's the last time someone in that role ever said that about e-learning or watching a video? Can't wait to tell my grandson about the video I watched today. It just doesn't happen. So we are seeing that even the most skeptical or the most technologically resistant, once they do it, they love it. And some of these NPS scores internally are off the charts relative to other learning initiatives.
Great. And so we've got a couple more questions, but we're going to call this one maybe the last question for the day, and I think it's a good one to wrap up on. And so there's been a couple more around implementation, average time frame. Is there a quick way to launch VR training? See if it's a good start. So how to get started? What's the implementation look like? And that'll be the last question for the day.
Yeah, great question. We could actually spend all day with this one. On this one, I'll try to keep it short. Okay, so this is kind of multifaceted. There's like your content production. How do I get started there? There's your procurement of headsets. There's your legal and IT process. There's your change management. I'll kind of give you like a bottom line, right? For us, when we get a customer that wants to go quickly from that first phone call, maybe from first phone call to agreement on scope, price, here's what we're doing. Yes, we're moving forward. I got my executive sign off, et cetera. Maybe 2 months by the time we kind of get meetings and do presentations and pitches and get approvals. Okay. Then after that, obviously there's going to be legal and IT for a lot of you. And that is this infinite black hole sometimes that we don't know what's going on. And we go as fast as we can, but it's out of our control. Usually what we do with someone that wants to move quickly is when we have your thumbs up, we're parallel pathing a lot. So, hey, are you in? Great. Let's parallel path the content build with the legal and IT process. And let's not cut corners, but let's also, go eyes wide open with business sponsors pushing legal and IT on both sides to make sure that we're not doing too much in an initial engagement versus what we would have to do at scale, right? So usually that's another, 1 to 2 months. The content is being built all along, and the content could take anywhere from a week if you want something more off-the-shelf oriented, where we're not reinventing the wheel, to 3 or 4 months, where we're building something from scratch, and you have a bunch of approvals you have to get from your legal department, and you guys know how that goes. Sometimes the customer's their own worst enemy when we're like, hey, what can we do here? We need approvals on this, right? And then we go live. So, I'd say in a typical like fast moving situation, from first phone call to what we call headset on face for the learner, it can be as little as 3 to 4 months. And that has happened several times. On average, 4 to 6 months from first phone call to headset on face, depending on how those approvals go along the way. And then obviously from there, all right, are we doing it with 100 employees, 1,000, 10,000? And then it's kind of a whole nother ballgame. The content creation process, again, as little as a week for something more off the shelf, as much as 3 to 4 months for something more custom, more in depth, et cetera. But on average, 2 to 3 months of content development. Yeah.
Great. All right. So as I said, that's our last question. I want to thank everybody for their awesome participation in the webinar today. I thought we got some really great questions, really thoughtful questions. And Derek, thanks so much for answering them so candidly and for giving people some insight into the way we think about things at Strivr.
Love it. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We will compile the questions we didn't get to. We'll either do them on the next webinar or we'll reach out to all of you individually. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Right on. If there's anything else that we weren't able to handle for you today, please reach out to us. This is our contact info here, and we'd be happy to get back to you. As Derek said, we'll reach out on some of the questions. But if there's something that's more pressing, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk. So thanks, everybody.